Welcome back, everyone. Bail reform has been one of the most controversial issues in Albany for close to 2 years now. The law limits cash bail to certain crimes. Advocates say it keeps less wealthy people from being jailed before they're convicted just because they can't pay the money to get out. Opponents, though, say that it lets criminals keep reoffending without a way to keep them incarcerated. Today, thanks to numbers from the state and an analysis by the Albany Times-Union newspaper, we have an idea of the impact of the reform. Reporters with the paper looked at the first full year after bail reform started. There were nearly 100,000 instances of people being released for crimes that previously a judge could have set bail or ordered them be kept behind bars. Among those 100,000 cases, while out of jail, suspects were subsequently charged with a violent felony 4% of the time. Now that sounds like a low number, but it's really just part of the story. So joining us live right now to talk about it is Joshua Solomon, the Time-Union's Capitol Bureau reporter and one of the reporters behind this article and this research. We really appreciate you coming on. First, I want to ask what kind of stood out to you as you were doing this reporting, and what are we to make of that 4% number?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. The 4% number, which translates to around 3,500 cases of a violent felony on rearrest, that, you see that number. There are a lot of different ways, as you pointed out, of how to look at that. And what I noticed when going through the research is that one of the big issues that we happen to have is that we started collecting data for the state once the bail reform changes went into effect. So we don't necessarily have a great picture of what happened before. We know some of the picture in New York City, which suggests that it's kind of stayed even. But at the moment, we don't necessarily know what that means. But we do know that it's a lot of fuel for people on both sides to kind of have a conversation about what does this data mean, and is it worth it? Are the changes worth it for having 3,500 violent felonies? How different is that from what you normally see?
Yeah, you can see both sides kind of spinning that to their advantage, right? It's only 4% or it's 3,500 cases, which sounds like a lot. I wonder, are there certain types of crimes that tend to be more common in terms of a defendant getting rearrested on one of these violent felonies?
Sure. So I should note, though, that it's almost out of the nearly 100,000 cases, closer to maybe 30% of them end up being rearrested. Almost all of them are on misdemeanors, some of them on nonviolent, and then a few on violent felonies. That's where that 4% number comes from. You have different types of arrest here. You have some on burglaries and robberies, and then you have an even smaller fraction there that it really then says more toward where the rhetoric is coming from, that there's around bail reform, that there maybe are issues about violent crimes on the street. We know that little less than 1,000, it's actually about 773 cases were violent felonies with a firearm, which doesn't necessarily mean someone shot a gun or anything like that, but they were possessing a gun at the very least. So we have that level of detail, and we're further going into this data. It's huge, and we're just trying to understand it as everyone else is in the state. And this is what we know so far.
Yeah, and I should just take this opportunity to let everyone know. I mean, you can go to the Albany Times-Union website. Definitely worth reading the article because there's a lot of really interesting stuff in it. I wonder where we go from here, though. We've certainly seen call after call from opponents to the bail reform saying you need to kind of tweak it or make some substantial changes to it. We know that Governor Hochul is going to be giving her State of the State address in just a couple of days. What is your sense being there in Albany and covering this? Should we expect that there will be changes?
It's going to be an interesting 6 months. We both have legislative session, and we also have an election, a primary, the primary for governor. Both the Democratic and the Republican candidates will likely have a primary. So there's a lot going on in these 6 months and a lot of different political calculus that could play into whether we'll have changes. It may be that we don't have substantial changes. It could be, but nonetheless, the Democratic leaders, Stuart Cousins, Hasty, the Assembly Speaker, and the Majority Leader, they've showed that they're really passionate about keeping bail reform at the very least at where it's at, while Governor Hochul has shown at least a little interest and maybe some tweaks to it. But that's a lot to be seen, and there's going to be a lot of politics that play out in between here in June.
Yeah, no doubt about that. We'll see if the governor mentions this at all during the State of the State on Wednesday. Joshua Solomon is a reporter with the Albany Times-Union's Capitol Bureau. This is such an important topic. We really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.